Listen. Do you hear that? The gentle patter of rain against glass. For most of us, it's one of the most soothing sounds in the world. A natural lullaby that promises safety, comfort, and peace. But tonight, as those raindrops trace their paths down your window, I want you to remember something important. Not all storms are outside. Some of the most dangerous tempests rage within the human heart. Some of the most terrifying darkness exists not in the absence of light, but in the presence of evil that walks among us every single day. Welcome to Nightmare Echo. You and I are going to journey into 7 true stories that will challenge everything you thought you knew about human nature. These aren't tales spun from imagination. These aren't Hollywood fiction designed to thrill and entertain. These are real events that happen to real people, in real places, not so different from where you might be sitting right now. As the rain continues to fall, creating that familiar rhythm of safety and predictability, ask yourself this question: how well do you really know the people in your life? Your neighbors, your co-workers, your family members, the strangers you pass on the street? What secrets might they be hiding? What darkness might they be concealing behind their everyday smiles? Tonight, we'll meet a mother who stood over her sleeping 6-year-old daughter, hammer in hand. In another state, a 4-month-old baby takes her final breath locked inside a dresser drawer. Tonight, as we journey through 7 cases that will shake you to your core, stories where the unthinkable becomes reality, where trust is shattered, and where evil wears familiar faces. What drives a parent to harm their own child? How does a simple water fight turn deadly? And what makes someone smile after committing the ultimate betrayal? These aren't just stories, they're windows into the darkest corners of human nature. Are you ready to face the unthinkable? Let's begin. Louisville, Kentucky. June 19, 2025. It was an ordinary Wednesday afternoon on Wilson Avenue, where children's laughter usually filled the air. But today, that laughter would be replaced by sirens, and a mother's love would transform into something monstrous. 40-year-old Zainab Abdi lived in this quiet neighborhood with her children. To neighbors, she seemed like any other mother, until the day she picked up a hammer and changed everything forever. What goes through a mother's mind in those final moments before she strikes? Zainab Abdi later told police she frequently becomes extremely angry and has difficulty controlling herself. But anger doesn't explain what happened next. It was just after noon when the call came in to Louisville Metro Police. A girl had been attacked with a hammer. The dispatcher's voice remained calm, but the words sent chills through the responding officers. When police arrived at the Wilson Avenue residence, they found a scene that would haunt them forever. A 6-year-old girl, suffering from multiple skull fractures and brain bleeding, clinging to life. But the most disturbing detail wasn't the injuries, it was what her brother witnessed. As he restrained his mother after the attack, Zainab Abdi begged him with words that no child should ever hear, "Let me finish her." Think about that for a moment. What kind of rage, what kind of complete break from humanity, drives a mother to not just attack her child, but to beg to complete the murder while her son tries to save his sister's life? When police read Zainab Abdi her Miranda rights, she agreed to speak. What she said next revealed the terrifying reality of uncontrolled rage. She admitted to striking her daughter in the head with a hammer, an unknown amount of times. Unknown amount. As if in her fury, she lost count of how many times she brought that weapon down on her own child's skull. The 6-year-old girl was rushed to a local hospital where she remains in critical condition. For days after the attack, she was still fighting for her life, fighting against injuries inflicted by the person who should have protected her above all others. What transforms a mother into a monster? Zainab Abdi acknowledged her anger issues, but millions of people struggle with anger without picking up hammers against their children. Was this premeditated? The choice of weapon suggests deliberation. Hammers don't just appear in your hand during a moment of passion. You have to go get one. You have to pick it up. You have to make the conscious decision to use it. And what about that chilling phrase, "Let me finish her"? These words suggest this wasn't just an outburst of rage, but a calculated attempt at murder. The brother who intervened, imagine carrying that burden. He saved his sister's life, but he also had to physically restrain his own mother while she begged to complete a murder. How does a child process such a betrayal of everything family is supposed to represent? Zainab Abdi now sits in Louisville Metro Corrections, held on $500,000 bail. She faces attempted murder charges, but the real sentence is what she's done to her family. Her daughter fights for survival in a hospital bed. Her son carries the trauma of that day. And somewhere in this tragedy lies a question we may never answer: what could have been done to prevent this? But maternal violence isn't always so obvious. Sometimes it hides behind closed doors, in places where no one thinks to look. Our next story takes us to a motel room in Texas, where another mother's betrayal led to an even more unthinkable end. Story 2. Houston, Texas. May 26, 2024. In a rundown motel on Rancho Mission Drive, a housekeeper was making her routine rounds when she discovered something that would forever change how she viewed the world. Inside a dresser drawer, she found the lifeless body of 4-month-old Brooklyn Fancher. This wasn't just a tragic accident, this was the result of a year-long nightmare that no child should ever endure. Jeremy Fancher, 38, and Destiny Campos, 21, had been living at this motel for over a year. To the outside world, they were just another struggling young family trying to make ends meet. But behind the closed door of their room, a horror story was unfolding. The housekeeper who found Brooklyn later told investigators she had seen this before, the baby sleeping in the dresser drawer. She had even taken photos and alerted management. But nobody acted. Nobody saved her. Rain intensifies with emotion. Think about that. Multiple people knew this baby was being kept in a drawer, and yet Brooklyn continued to spend her short life trapped in darkness. According to the Harris County Medical Examiner's Office, Brooklyn died from suffocation. But this wasn't an accident. Destiny allegedly told investigators that Jeremy would seal the drawer shut with a towel to prevent their daughter from kicking it open. Let that sink in. They knew she was trying to get out. They knew she was struggling. And they made sure she couldn't escape. When police arrived that May day, both parents had their stories ready. Jeremy claimed he was at the store and came back to find the drawer shut. Destiny said she was asleep and assumed the baby was with Jeremy. But their lies couldn't hide the evidence. Investigators found methamphetamines in the room. The same room where their baby daughter had been suffocating in a dresser drawer. Luann Simon, Brooklyn's maternal great-grandmother, revealed the most heartbreaking detail of all. According to Simon, Destiny had told her this wasn't the first time they'd put Brooklyn in the drawer. They would shut her in there whenever they wanted alone time. Alone time. While their 4-month-old baby gasped for air in a sealed drawer, her parents wanted alone time. For over a year after Brooklyn's death, Jeremy and Destiny lived their lives as if nothing had happened. They weren't arrested immediately. They weren't held accountable. As Luann Simon said, they have been living their lives like nothing ever happened. During this year of freedom, what did they think about? Did they remember their daughter's face? Did they hear her cries in their dreams? Or had they convinced themselves that what they did was somehow justified? The Harris County Sheriff's Office finally arrested them in June 2025. Jeremy's bond was set at $850,000, Destiny's at $300,000. But no amount of money can bring back the daughter they killed through neglect and cruelty. How does this happen? How do two people decide that a dresser drawer is an appropriate place for their baby to sleep? And how do they live with themselves after sealing that drawer shut? But perhaps the most disturbing question is this: how many other Brooklyns are out there right now, trapped in situations where adults have failed them, where society has looked the other way? Sometimes the most innocent activities can turn deadly in an instant. Our next story shows us how quickly joy can become tragedy, how a simple summer day can end in blood. Story 3. The Bronx, New York. June 25, 2025. It was one of those sweltering summer evenings when the heat makes the pavement shimmer and drives kids to seek relief wherever they can find it. 17-year-old Daryl Harris was about to enter his senior year at Bronx Leadership Academy. He was quiet, preferred staying indoors, but on this particular evening, his friends had convinced him to join them for something innocent, a water gun fight in Starlight Park. He told me he was going to the park because his friends were having a water gun fight, his mother, Kelly Lewis, would later tell reporters. It was the kind of activity that should represent the best of summer, kids cooling off, laughing, playing together. But what Kelly Lewis didn't know was that this would be the last conversation she'd ever have with her son. Around 8:15 p.m., near Sheridan Boulevard and East 173rd Street, the water fight was in full swing. Teenagers ran around the park, soaking each other with plastic weapons, their laughter mixing with the sounds of the city. Daryl was getting hit repeatedly in the head with water from one particular person's gun. Over and over, the cold streams hit him. Finally, like any normal person would, he asked the shooter to stop. "Stop repeatedly shooting me in the head with water." It was a reasonable request. The kind of thing you'd say to a friend during play. But what happened next transformed innocent fun into a nightmare. The person with the water gun didn't apologize. They didn't laugh it off. Instead, they reached for something else, something real, something deadly. A gun. Not plastic. Not filled with water. But metal and bullets and death. The shots rang out across Starlight Park. Daryl Harris was hit in the head and arm. The same areas that had just been hit with water moments before were now bleeding real blood. Rain intensifies dramatically. The shooter fled immediately, leaving Daryl dying on the ground where children had been playing just moments before. Daryl was rushed to Jacobi Hospital in critical condition, but his injuries were too severe. The quiet boy who didn't like going outside, who had been convinced by friends to join one simple water fight, was gone. For Kelly Lewis, this wasn't just the loss of a son, it was history repeating itself in the cruelest way possible. Her older son, Jamal Hunter, had been shot and killed in 2021. The killer had been arrested and convicted, but now she was facing the same nightmare all over again. "I've been through this already with my oldest son," she told reporters. "I have to make sure my other children are well. They lost one sibling, now they just lost another one, so it takes a toll on the whole family, and that's what these kids don't realize when they pick up these weapons." 2 sons. Both lost to gun violence. Both deaths senseless and preventable. The NYPD reports that shooting victims under the age of 18 have gone up 133% since 2018. Daryl Harris became another statistic in a growing epidemic. No arrests have been made. The shooter who turned a water fight into a murder scene remains free, while a family grieves another lost child. Violence doesn't always come from strangers in parks. Sometimes it strikes where we least expect it, at festivals, in crowds, where people gather to celebrate life. But what happens when someone brings darkness to those bright moments? Story 4. La Rochelle, France. June 21, 2025. The Fêtes de la Musique was in full swing, a celebration of music and life that draws thousands of young people into the streets. The air was filled with laughter, music, and the joy of summer. But hidden in this crowd of celebrants was someone with a very different intention. Someone carrying syringes. Someone hunting for victims. At 9:15 p.m. local time, the first call came in to police. Syringe attacks, the report said. Multiple young women, aged 14 to 20, were being targeted by an unknown assailant. When authorities responded to Rue du Palais, they found a scene of chaos and terror. More than a dozen young women were crying, confused, frightened. They had been stabbed with syringes by a stranger in the crowd. Think about the vulnerability of this moment. These were teenagers and young women out enjoying music and freedom. They trusted the crowd around them. They believed they were safe in numbers. But safety is an illusion when predators walk among us. The attacks weren't random. They were targeted. Young women between 14 and 20, a specific age range, a specific type of victim. This was calculated hunting. Mayor François Grosdadier coordinated an immediate response. Firefighters created gathering points for victims. Police began reviewing security footage. The hunt for the attacker had begun. Through video analysis, they identified their suspect, a male who had been moving through the crowd with purpose. One of the victims was able to identify him from the footage, confirming what investigators had suspected. But when they arrested him, they found no syringes on his person. The weapons used in the attacks had vanished. And the most disturbing question remained, was he acting alone? The investigation revealed that syringe attacks had occurred at multiple locations, Place de la République and Place Saint-Jacques. This wasn't just one person in one place. This was a coordinated campaign of terror against young women. What was in those syringes? The authorities haven't revealed the contents, but the fact that more than a dozen women required hospitalization suggests something more dangerous than simple assault. Were these women drugged? Were they poisoned? Were they infected with something? The silence from officials only deepens the mystery and the fear. The arrested suspect's phone is being examined, with investigators hoping to identify potential accomplices. Because the evidence suggests this wasn't a lone wolf attack, this was something organized, something planned. In a single evening, a celebration of music became a hunting ground. Young women who went out to enjoy life became victims of someone's twisted agenda. But what drives someone to such calculated violence? What makes a person target the innocent? Our next story takes us inside the mind of someone who committed the ultimate betrayal. And smiled while doing it. Story 5. Bradford, England. April 6, 2025. 25-year-old Kulsuma actor was living in a safe house, hiding from the man who had promised to love and protect her. But on this spring day, her worst fears would come true in the most public and brutal way possible. Her husband, Habibur Rahman Mansour, had been tracking her location through her phone. He had been sending her messages, photos, videos, all promising the same thing: he was going to kill her. What drives a husband to hunt his wife like prey? Mansour, 26 years old, had become obsessed with controlling Kulsuma. When she tried to leave him, he launched a campaign of terror. The messages were explicit. "I'm going to kill you." The photos showed he knew where she was living, despite her being in protective housing. The videos demonstrated his escalating rage. Kulsuma was living every domestic violence victim's nightmare. Even when she tried to escape, even when she sought help, her abuser found ways to reach her. On April 6, Mansour's tracking paid off. He found her on a Bradford street, pushing their 7-month-old son in a stroller. She was simply going shopping, trying to live a normal life despite the terror that stalked her. When he confronted her, Kulsuma told him she didn't want to continue being married to him. It was a reasonable statement from a woman who had been threatened with death. But for Mansour, it was a trigger. What happened next occurred in broad daylight, on a public street, with their baby watching from his stroller. Mansour stabbed Kulsuma more than 25 times with a kitchen knife. Not once or twice in a moment of passion, but 25 deliberate wounds. This was an execution disguised as domestic violence. Witnesses watched in horror as a woman was butchered by her husband while their infant son sat just feet away. The baby who should have been surrounded by his parents' love instead witnessed his father murder his mother. But the most chilling detail came from security footage. After stabbing his wife to death in front of their child, Mansour calmly walked away from the scene. At the bus stop, waiting for public transportation as if he'd just finished shopping, Habibur Rahman Mansour smiled. The cameras captured it clearly, a genuine smile spreading across the face of a man who had just committed murder. Prosecutor Stephen Wood KC told the Bradford Crown Court what that smile represented: there were no tears, there was no distress. Perhaps, members of the jury, the smile you can clearly see form as he gets on that bus is as a result of him thinking at that point he's getting away. The smiling killer. This wasn't remorse. This wasn't shock. This was satisfaction. The smile of someone who believed he had solved his problem by murdering the mother of his child. For 3 days, Mansour evaded capture, traveling 175 miles south from the murder scene. 3 days of freedom while Kulsuma lay dead and their son was left motherless. When police finally found him, Mansour tried to claim the murder occurred during a psychotic episode induced by cocaine, alcohol and steroids. He said he was spiked and totally blacked out. On June 27, 2025, Habibur Rahman Mansour was found guilty of murder, assault, making threats to kill, and stalking. The jury saw through his lies about drug-induced psychosis. The evidence was clear, this was premeditated murder. The tracking, the threats, the kitchen knife, the 25 stab wounds, and most damning of all, that smile. Detective Stacey Atkinson said, Mansour carried out the murder then calmly walked away as if nothing had happened. He left the scene and made his way out of the city to try and escape justice. But justice found him. Though it came too late for Kulsuma, too late for their son, and too late for a family destroyed by one man's inability to accept that love cannot be forced. Sometimes evil hides behind ordinary facades. Our next story takes us to Japan, where a man used social media to hunt the most vulnerable victims imaginable. Story 6. Tokyo, Japan. 2017, in a small apartment in Zama, just 20 miles from the bustling capital, a neighbor called police about a suspicious smell coming from the unit next door. What they discovered would reveal one of Japan's most horrific serial killing sprees. Takahiro Shiraishi, 34, had turned his home into a charnel house. Coolers filled with dismembered body parts. Bones cleaned and stored like trophies. The remains of 9 people who had trusted him with their deepest pain. Shiraishi didn't hunt his victims in dark alleys or isolated areas. He found them in the most modern way possible, through social media. On what was then called Twitter, now known as X. His targets were specific, young women expressing suicidal thoughts online. People at their most vulnerable, reaching out into the digital void for understanding or help. Justice Minister Keisuke Suzuki described these victims as mentally fragile. They were teenagers and young women who had lost hope, who were struggling with depression, who saw death as their only escape from pain. Shiraishi positioned himself as their savior. He would reach out to these desperate souls, offering to help them end their lives painlessly. He presented himself as compassionate, understanding, someone who cared about their suffering. But this was a lie designed to lure victims to their deaths. Shiraishi wasn't interested in helping anyone, he was collecting victims for his own twisted purposes. 8 young women. The youngest was just 15 years old. They came to him seeking peace from their mental anguish, and instead found unimaginable horror. When police entered Shiraishi's apartment in 2017, they found a scene that would haunt investigators forever. Human bones and dismembered body parts stored in coolers throughout the rooms. Shiraishi had used cat litter to mask the smell of decomposing human remains. He was living surrounded by the mutilated bodies of people who had trusted him. The victims weren't just killed, they were beaten and strangled, killed, robbed, and then mutilated, according to Justice Minister Suzuki. But the horror didn't end with death. All 8 female victims had been raped. Shiraishi had sexually assaulted these vulnerable women before murdering them. He had taken their desperation, their trust, their hope for relief from pain, and turned it into an opportunity for violence. He also killed the boyfriend of one victim, not out of rage or passion, but coldly, calculatedly, to prevent him from alerting police. This man's only crime was loving someone who had become Shiraishi's target. Shiraishi's killing spree was discovered when the brother of one victim found communications between his sister and the killer on Twitter. This brother's vigilance and love for his sister exposed a monster. When investigators dug deeper into the communications, they found a pattern of predatory behavior. Shiraishi had been systematically targeting vulnerable people online, building trust, then luring them to their deaths. Justice Minister Suzuki revealed Shiraishi's true motivation, satisfying his sexual and financial desires. These weren't mercy killings or assisted suicides, they were rape and murder committed against society's most vulnerable members. On June 27, 2025, Takahiro Shiraishi was executed by hanging. This marked Japan's first execution since 2022, and it came after careful consideration by Justice Minister Suzuki. In Japan, condemned inmates receive little advance warning of their execution, often just a few hours. Family members are given no warning at all. Shiraishi went to his death the same way his victims did, suddenly, without preparation. The European Union criticized the execution, calling capital punishment incompatible with the inalienable right to life. But for the families of 9 victims, it represented the only justice available. Shiraishi earned the nickname Twitter Killer for his method of finding victims. But he was more than that, he was a predator who weaponized social media to hunt the hopeless. His death closed a chapter of horror, but it couldn't bring back the 9 people whose only crime was seeking help in their darkest moments. Our final story brings us back to America, where a son's addiction led to an act so horrific that it defies comprehension. He also killed the boyfriend of one victim, not out of rage or passion, but coldly, calculatedly, to prevent him from alerting police. This man's only crime was loving someone who had become Shiraishi's target. Shiraishi's killing spree was discovered when the brother of one victim found communications between his sister and the killer on Twitter. This brother's vigilance and love for his sister exposed a monster. When investigators dug deeper into the communications, they found a pattern of predatory behavior. Shiraishi had been systematically targeting vulnerable people online, building trust, then luring them to their deaths. Justice Minister Suzuki revealed Shiraishi's true motivation, satisfying his sexual and financial desires. These weren't mercy killings or assisted suicides, they were rape and murder committed against society's most vulnerable members. On June 27, 2025, Takahiro Shiraishi was executed by hanging. This marked Japan's first execution since 2022, and it came after careful consideration by Justice Minister Suzuki. In Japan, condemned inmates receive little advance warning of their execution, often just a few hours. Family members are given no warning at all. Shiraishi went to his death the same way his victims did, suddenly, without preparation. The European Union criticized the execution, calling capital punishment incompatible with the inalienable right to life. But for the families of 9 victims, it represented the only justice available. Shiraishi earned the nickname Twitter Killer for his method of finding victims. But he was more than that, he was a predator who weaponized social media to hunt the hopeless. His death closed a chapter of horror, but it couldn't bring back the 9 people whose only crime was seeking help in their darkest moments. Our final story brings us back to America, where a son's addiction led to an act so horrific that it defies comprehension. Story 7. Opelousas, Louisiana. June 22, 2025. Lisa Lloyd, 65 years old, thought she was helping her son Aaron through his struggles with addiction. She had no way of knowing that her compassion would lead to her death at his hands. What we're about to discuss represents perhaps the most fundamental betrayal possible, a child destroying the parent who gave them life. When police received a report that Aaron Lloyd, 33, had admitted to killing his mother and dumping her body in a trash can, they initially hoped it was a false alarm. Surely no one would confess to such an act unless they were mentally ill or lying. But when officers arrived at the single-family home in Opelousas, they found Lisa Lloyd exactly where her son said she would be, inside a trash can underneath the carport. Aaron Lloyd didn't just kill his mother. According to his own confession to investigators, he injected her with methamphetamine before fatally beating her to death. Think about the deliberation this requires. He had to obtain the methamphetamine. He had to prepare the injection. He had to hold down his 65-year-old mother and inject her with poison before beating her to death. This wasn't a sudden rage. This wasn't self-defense. This was a well-calculated murder of the woman who had given him life. Lisa Lloyd was 65 years old, an age when she should have been enjoying retirement, grandchildren, the peaceful twilight of a life well lived. Instead, her final moments were filled with terror and betrayal. What was her last thought as her son approached her with that syringe? Did she realize what was happening? Did she try to reason with him? Did she tell him she loved him even as he prepared to murder her? The methamphetamine injection wasn't meant to kill her quickly, it was meant to incapacitate her, to make the beating easier. Aaron Lloyd wanted his mother conscious and aware as he ended her life. After murdering Lisa, Aaron didn't call 911. He didn't seek help. He didn't show remorse. Instead, he disposed of her body like garbage, literally throwing her into a trash can as if she meant nothing. For days, Lisa Lloyd lay in that trash can while her son walked free. Her family wondered where she was. Her friends probably called her phone. And all the while, her body was decomposing in a garbage container because her son couldn't face what he had done. When police tracked down Aaron Lloyd in Krotz Springs, he confessed to the killing. There was no attempt to hide what he had done, no elaborate story to explain away the evidence. He has been charged with first-degree murder, aggravated second-degree battery, obstruction of justice, failure to seek assistance, and distribution of a Schedule II drug. But no list of charges can capture the magnitude of what Aaron Lloyd did. He didn't just kill someone, he killed the person who loved him most in the world. Opelousas Police Chief Greg LeBlanc called it a deeply tragic and heartbreaking case that has impacted our entire community. But impact doesn't adequately describe the shockwaves of such a betrayal. What drives a son to inject his mother with methamphetamine and beat her to death? Was it drug-fueled paranoia? Was it desperation for money? Was it simply evil in its purest form? Aaron Lloyd's confession tells us what happened, but it doesn't tell us why. What made him look at the woman who bore him, raised him, probably sacrificed for him, and decide she needed to die? Lisa Lloyd's family now faces a double tragedy: they've lost someone they loved, and they've lost her to someone they also loved. How do you grieve a murder when the murderer is your own family? Sometimes the monsters aren't strangers hiding in shadows. Sometimes they're the people we trust most, the people we love most, the people who know exactly how to hurt us because we've given them the power to do so. Aaron Lloyd sits in St. Landry Parish Jail, awaiting justice for destroying the woman who gave him everything. But no sentence can repair the broken trust, restore the lost life, or answer the question that haunts every family member: how could someone we love do something so unforgivable? 7 stories. 7 journeys into the darkest corners of human nature. From Louisville to Houston, from the Bronx to France, from Louisiana to Scotland, we've explored the terrible truth that evil exists in every corner of our world. A mother who tried to kill her own daughter with a hammer. Parents who suffocated their baby in a dresser drawer. A water gun fight that became a murder scene. A festival attack that terrorized innocent young women. A son who injected his mother with drugs before beating her to death. A postman who decapitated and dismembered his girlfriend. These are not just stories. These are warnings. Remember that the person sitting next to you on the bus, the neighbor who waves good morning, the family member you trust most, any of them could be harboring darkness that defies imagination. But perhaps the most disturbing truth is this: evil often wears the most ordinary faces. It works regular jobs, lives in normal homes, and hides behind smiles and small talk. The monsters among us don't announce themselves with horns and fangs. They blend in, they wait, and they strike when we least expect it. As the rain washes over the world tonight, cleansing it of the day's sins, remember that some stains never truly disappear. Some actions echo through eternity, leaving scars on the souls of everyone they touch. Sleep well, if you can. And remember too, in a world where evil walks among us wearing familiar faces, vigilance is not paranoia. It's survival.